going to be Badgley from the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology here at the University of Michigan. And she has been a colleague, co-teacher, and co-dreamer with John. And she's going to talk to us about transforming the food system.
Okay, well, I am an unrepentant paleontologist who has had an abiding interest in the food system, and a lot of that has developed in very, for me, very enriching ways by my collaborations with Yvette Perfecto and John Vandermeer over almost 20 years now. And Yvette and I developed a course, Food, Land, and Society, that we've been teaching since 1999, and that's taken us on field trips all over southern Michigan and also to Cuba and to Chiapas, and all of those trips have given me the conviction that we are, not only that there's a huge amount of regime change in the food system now, but that we are headed in directions that are potentially very positive. So what I'd like to do today, knowing that it's after lunch and it's also after jockey, who's a very hard act to follow, is I'd like to present a vision of where the food system could be heading. This is an optimistic vision. I'm not presenting in any sense an end point, but more of a waypoint. And I will first give you the vision of what this will be as if we're in the future, and then talk a little bit about how we might get there. So, relax. The year is 2030. Elizabeth Warren is in her second term as president. It gets better. The Secretary of Agriculture is Stacy Philpott. For those of you who don't know her, one of John and Yvette's former students and currently on the faculty at UC Santa Cruz. She, among many other things, which I'll elaborate in a moment, is adopting Wes Jackson's goals for the 50-year Farm Bill, in which annual grains are gradually being replaced with perennial grains across the United States. There are thousands of polyculture farms across the U.S. The average farm size is 100 acres, down from the 441 acres that it is today. 50% of livestock animals are raised on pasture, and that number is increasing, has been steadily increasing. The number of livestock animals is half in today, that is 2030, as it was in 2015. And there has been a tenfold increase in fruit and vegetable production across U.S. farms, and a 60% decline in feed grain production. Farm Bill subsidies continue, but with very new priorities. There are now allocations to farms where soil organic matter is increasing through methods such as organic production, no-till, perennial polycultures, any method that is increasing soil organic matter. Where soil microbial diversity is high, recognizing the important roles of soil microbes in producing healthy plants that also have a strong influence on human health. For fruit and vegetable production. And there's a new biodiversity index that is, and when this number is greater than 42, then the farms also get a special subsidy. 25% and increasing of U.S. farm area is now under organic management. Urban gardens are thriving in U.S. cities. More than half of public schools have a vegetable garden. The price of food has doubled relative to 2015. Animal products are now 5 times more expensive as in 2015, and prices are inversely proportional to their position on this public health food pyramid from one of Walter Willett's books. All farm workers receive a living wage. Farmer field schools occur across the country where farmers learn about intransitive loops and Turing processes for farm management. Health indicators have improved steadily with reduced levels of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. Mexico is no longer importing corn from the United States. And finally, in this vision, ADM and Monsanto have declared bankruptcy. differences from John and Yvette's work that have influenced my vision. One is the complex networks of causality, which are present not only among all the members of the coffee agroecosystem, but equally and even more profoundly maybe across the food system itself. Another is agroecology as a central theme of food production and its potential for growing all the food that the world needs. And finally, the central role of social justice, which we'll hear more about from a couple of the next speakers. So what about getting there? Well, I have several ideas that are inspired by events that are already in progress about how we might be moving in that direction. One, starting with local grassroots actions in Michigan, is that the expansion of grassroots actions at the local level, with farms and urban gardens being a focus for community building, for jobs, and for generating a hopeful outlook for young people, is turning out to be a very powerful force in society. We see that all around us in Ann Arbor and in Detroit, and I find it in all the other places that we've visited with our class. From a very different kind of influence, climate crises, including the droughts that await us in the next decade, are leading to major crop failures, especially under industrial agriculture. And this failure under industrial agriculture is marking a turning point to a broader recognition of agroecology as the guiding principle for food production. And then this will lead to the wider adoption of very familiar agroecological practices, polycultures, perennial grains increasing, management of networks of species interactions for pest control, the importance of soil microbial diversity, the importance of increasing organic matter, managing soil fertility organically in ways that turn out to be very drought resistant. Crop failures are also forcing a more rational use of water in agriculture, and this is what has especially prompted the decline in livestock production because it is so water intensive, and an increased emphasis on growing food for people over U.S. farmland. Because of the importance of the greater importance of food that's for people that's recognized by crop failures, it is also why higher priority is now given to the work that's being done on farms, and therefore the wages of farm workers are increasing. And partly from social activism and partly from greater concern about the reliability of the food supply. And as food prices increase, food waste declines. The failure of the industrial agricultural model has also provided the impetus for a radical reevaluation of subsidies in the Farm Bill. Subsidies are now transferred from feed grains and sugar to vegetables and fruits, causing the prices of vegetables and fruits to remain low while the prices of meat and dairy and sugar increase. Support remains and even increases for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what we know as food stamps, partly to enable low-income people to have access to what is now more expensive food, and farm-to-school programs, as illustrated in this image here, are supported through the school lunch program across the country. Some of this is already underway in Michigan, and so my thinking is that this, with very positive effects, that this will increase across the country. A fundamental shift in U.S. dietary habits is already underway. For example, this announcement from Forbes magazine last year was the packaged food industry bemoaning the fact that they had lost 4% of profits because more shoppers are cruising the outside of the supermarket buying fresh food and organic alternatives to the processed food that is in the middle aisles. And also eating on lower trophic levels. And health indicators related to diet improve as a result, with the cost of healthcare stabilizing. And finally, studies already known to many of us here find that diets with greater health benefits also have lower greenhouse gas emissions, thereby improving the role of agriculture in actually helping to solve the climate problem, the climate crisis, rather than being one of its major causes. And then ultimately, the number of farms, rural and urban, increases across the United States as farming becomes a reliable, appreciated, and enjoyable livelihood, similar to what has happened in Cuba since the 1990s. Well, I'd like to end with a few acknowledgments, and for the processes and the components that make our agricultural ecosystems possible, and the critical role of social justice in achieving any kind of truly sustainable food system, which has to be sustainable socially as well as ecologically. And finally, the great illuminations of John and Yvette and many of you in this room for providing the insights and convictions that this vision of a better world is possible. Thank you.
We have time for questions. Catherine?
Catherine, thank you so much for that beautiful vision. I just want to offer that you might consider adding in 2 more pieces.
Okay.
And one is increased, looking at shifts in land ownership, especially increased access to agricultural land for individuals and communities of color in the U.S., and also campaign finance reform so that we can push through some of these.
Well, very excellent points. I think the very fact that Elizabeth Warren is in her second means that we're all, it has implicit with it a whole series of reforms of that sort. But thank you very much. Well said. Well taken.
Yeah, thank you also. That kind of vision I think is really great in sort of making us think about where we want to go to. And I want to ask about one of the details. If food costs twice as much, is it just SNAP that makes up the difference for poorer people? Is it just more food stamps, or is there something beyond that that is necessary to compensate for the regressive effect of increasing food prices?
Excellent question. I think something much beyond. I don't think we can count on something like SNAP to solve that. I think that, again, the implication would be that if we had progressive leadership, that we would be tackling some of the major problems, sources of inequality that we have in our society today, and so that we would actually see, we would definitely need essentially a redistribution of wealth across the country. So it's not just a matter of massive parts of society being unable to afford food. That's just not, I don't think that's viable. I don't think that's sustainable. That's a very good point.
Catherine, you shout, stand up and shout. Recording. Okay. First of all, yeah, thanks for that. And it's also, I'm going to credit you for being very daring for offering something optimistic in this group of people. Because for those of us, I just say, so does this work in Central America? We don't know the word optimism. But with all total respect, though. But my question is this, actually, and it precisely goes also to the international dimension, because even though it's true that in a globalized, so-called globalizing world, food production is still, a lot of it, the majority still happens within national borders. I guess I question why our vision is limited to the United States, because it seems like there's, especially grain production.
It's an excellent question. I limited it to the United States partly because it's where I live, and I feel as though I can potentially have more influence here than I can elsewhere, and because we have such a huge impact on the rest of the world. That if we, many of the trends and policies established here are, of course, having global impacts. So I don't see that we can achieve a sustainable global system without fundamental changes in the U.S. food system. And but there's plenty of work to do here. And so the one acknowledgement of the international dimension was my comment about Mexico, and I thought about, but I was concerned about time, so I didn't add another point, that we would under this vision, one would renegotiate trade agreements. If they still can exist, so that what we call dumping is no longer permitted. And what that would mean then is that Mexican farmers would be growing corn for Mexico, and that would then also stimulate rural livelihoods in Mexico, in principle. And likewise, similar effects would occur elsewhere. So we would also entertain a whole nother chapter about what would be the effects at the level of the World Trade Organization and so forth. You're absolutely right. The global the food system is very interconnected, but there's so many important. Well, partly it's I think I see the changes underway here very vividly, and a lot has to happen here before we can have, I think, more sustainable food systems worldwide. So that's my thinking there.
One more question.
So, just for you to add and incorporate to this wonderful presentation, to Doug's question, there's actually some really good recent research implying that increased prices, if it goes to the farmer primarily, bids up urban wages as well. And there's some really good data from mainstream institutions hypothesizing that actually urban poverty decreases when food prices increase. So it's certainly very quite possible based on basically bidding up the price of labor, and that also would have an effect internationally in terms of raising the prices for other countries in terms of the food that they would be buying.
Right. Well, and thank you, Jahi, and I'll get that reference from you at a later time. But I mean, one of the things that surprised me most in starting to understand the U.S. food system is the fact that food deserts occur over many of the agricultural regions of the United States, and that seems like such a bizarre paradox. That seems that then, if under this very new direction, if there were increased wages not only for farmers but for farm workers, that would have tremendous stimuli in rural areas. It would enable the repopulation of rural areas that have been heavily depopulated over the last several decades. So, yeah. Thank you.